5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate again the witnesses being here. Harmeet, it's great to see you again, and thanks for being a part of this panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member.
Hey, you're a constitutional attorney, right, Harmeet?
That is correct.
You know, part of our Constitution, specifically relays that our elections should be run at the state and local level. Another very important part of our Constitution is the right of every American to be able to petition their government, right?
That is correct. First part of the First Amendment.
So it's part of the First Amendment, and here we are today. We're having another hearing about voter ID, and at the same time, Speaker Pelosi is requiring anyone who visits the United States Capitol to come petition their government to show an ID. So is Speaker Pelosi racist?
Well, I won't. She's my representative, and so I won't go so far as to say that. However, I would say that it is very unfortunate that Speaker Pelosi has limited the right of petition. In fact, I have a lawsuit pending against Speaker Pelosi and the United States Congress concerning the right of people to be able to pray on the Capitol grounds. So certainly, some constitutional rights are more equal than others today. But I think that right of access to the polls is incredibly important as an immigrant. My mother was a poll worker in Johnston County, North Carolina, a poll observer rather. And, in the 1970s, the access to voting for minorities in this country in the South was very different than it is today. And I think we need to recognize the great strides we've made in this country and make laws that are relevant today, not laws that hearken to eras, decades gone by.
I certainly couldn't agree more, Ms. Dillon. As my good friend, Mr. Aguilar mentioned, there was some polling data that was discussed by Ranking Member Stile. I see even higher numbers in those polls than I see in polls related to the issues that my good friend, Mr. Aguilar brought up. But why do you think many of today's panelists are opposing the will of this large majority of voters who support pragmatic voter ID laws?
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate, and certainly I think some of the speakers here have cited studies, but self-reported studies of survey participants is very similar to a poll, in my opinion, and so you can take those or leave those. We simply don't have accurate data, even around the world, if you look at studies around the world, of why people don't vote. There are many different theories. Certainly one of them is this confidence issue, and it's been discussed in a bipartisan basis for many years. I think it is incumbent upon elected officials to increase voter confidence and try to get that participation up. The participation is higher in some developed countries around the world than it is in the United States. And so if barriers include the cost of ID, and I accept that as true, the government should work to eliminate those barriers as opposed to eliminating the safeguard. That seems to be very common sense. And where you see government officials pushing required vaccination to enjoy basic civil rights, another issue that I'm litigating, you question why they don't want to solve that problem of identification that is required to access so many fundamental rights today.
You mentioned some very good points there. And as we look ahead, I too agree that if there's going to be voter ID requirement, why not offer them for free? Throughout the entire last Congress before the pandemic hit, we were traveling the country, going place to place, talking about some of these issues. And each and every time a voter ID was required, there was a way to identify somebody at the lowest at the lowest cost, and in the most convenient way possible. Now you bring up another interesting aspect. It's the COVID-19 vaccine. We saw election authorities put in emergency procedures in the 2020 election cycle throughout this country, your home state of California, my home state of Illinois. And at the same time, now it seems many of our colleagues would be okay requiring a COVID vaccination to go into a polling place, but not a voter ID. Wouldn't that be a form of an ID?
Well, of course, and it's very intrusive and violates numerous civil rights. That's not what I was called here to testify about today, but if that becomes a requirement, there will be litigation certainly over that maybe even bipartisan litigation over that issue.
I knew you weren't here to testify, but I thought it was an interesting question. I know you can react to the questions well. I know you all. I've met you and I've seen you in action before. One real quick question: California, your home state. Please give me an idea of what happened with the voter rolls and also how it seemed that many voters received multiple ballots in the last election.
This is a problem throughout the United States that is compounded by the lack of clean voter rolls in our country. And there have been current Senator to United States Senator Alex Padilla was responsible for that election administration. And many people who are not citizens through no fault of their own have been automatically registered to vote. People have experienced multiple registrations. The fact that the state settled a case involving over 1 million registrations in Los Angeles County should have led to the cleanup of those voter rolls and cleanups throughout the state of 58 counties. That has not happened, and more litigation is likely imminent because a lack of integrity and consistency among our voter rolls does decrease voter participation and voter confidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies, I did go over, but I appreciate your consideration allowing me to continue. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I saw you winking your eye, Rodney, so I knew you were winding down. So we can be flexible sometimes, especially with the ranking member. Thank you very much. At this time, the chair recognizes